Han Duyan had been sitting in the lowest row of the grand chamber for 6 hours. His back was straight. His hands were folded on the desk. Front of him, his face showed nothing. Around him, 312 alien delegations filled the massive circular room, rising up in tiers like a stadium built for gods. Earth's delegation sat at the very bottom, the position of least honor. It been this way. The notification had arrived 2 days ago. A formal summons from the Galactic Assembly, stamped with the seal of the Grand Speaker himself. Earth had been placed on the censure docket. A shaming trial broadcast live to every inhabited world in the known galaxy. Duyan had read the charges 3 times, then set the document down and poured himself a cup of tea. He drank it slowly, standing at the window of his quarters, looking out at the stars that humanity had been told it did not deserve. He had called Yun Miri first. She ran Earth's Stellar Intelligence Bureau from a basement office in Seoul that officially did not exist. Her voice was calm, the way a blade is calm before it cuts. This is not random, she told him. We have tracked communications between the Ikthari Dominion and at least 6 other species over the past 4 months. They have been building a coalition. The vote to shame Earth was decided before you even received the summons. Who was leading it? Duyan asked. Delegate Asor Ikthari. He has the full backing of his government and the quiet support of Grand Speaker Veloth. Duyan was silent for a moment. Let them talk, he said. Record everything. Now he sat in the chamber and watched it happen. Grand Speaker Veloth opened the session from his elevated platform at the top of the room. He was Raithani, tall and thin with skin like polished stone. His voice carried the warmth of a host welcoming old friends to dinner. He greeted each delegation by name. He praised their contributions to galactic peace. When he reached Earth's delegation, he paused, smiled briefly, and moved on without a word. Then Delegate Asar took the floor. He was Ikthari, broad, armored with 4 arms and a jaw built for tearing. But his voice was smooth and practiced, the voice of a politician who had spent decades turning words into weapons. He walked to the center of the chamber, looked up at the assembled galaxy, and began to speak. Friends, he said, we gather today because there is a wound in our assembly, a wound we have ignored for too long, out of kindness, out of patience, out of the hope that the species called humanity might grow beyond its nature. He paused. That hope is dead. He activated the display behind him. Images appeared, footage, data. Humans breed at a rate that exceeds every known intelligent species by a factor of 3. Their home world has a history of unbroken violence stretching back to the earliest records of their civilization. They have fought wars over land, over religion, over the color of their skin. They have split the atom and used it to burn cities filled with children. The footage showed mushroom clouds, mass graves, burning villages, soldiers marching through ruins. The images were old, pulled from Earth's own historical archives, but they were real. Every frame was real. Hyun did not look away. Beside him, I am Sujin, his junior attaché, gripped the edge of her desk. Her knuckles were white. Asar continued. And now intelligence reports indicate that Earth has been secretly expanding its military fleet beyond the limits set by the Accord of Peaceful Integration. They are building warships, they are training soldiers, they are preparing for a war that only a predator species would want. I present to this assembly the evidence that humanity is not merely a young civilization struggling to find its place. Humanity is a threat, a biological, cultural, and military threat to every peaceful world in this galaxy. The chamber responded, not with shouting or anger, but with something worse. Agreement. Quiet nodding, righteous agreement. Hyun watched as delegates from species he had worked with for years, species he had shared meals with, turned their bodies slightly away from the human section. A small gesture, but he noticed. Azar finished his speech to silence. That slowly became applause. Not thunderous polite. The applause of a room that had already made up its mind. Velos looked down from his platform. Earth may now respond. Hyun stood. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. 312 species, billions of viewers on billions of worlds. They expected him to apologize, to beg, to make promises about reform and oversight and cooperation. That was what young species did when they were cornered. He straightened his jacket, walked to the front of his delegation's table and spoke. Earth acknowledges the Assembly's concerns, he said. His voice was even, almost gentle. We request a recess until dawn of the next cycle to prepare our formal reply. That was all. Asar laughed. He actually laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed off the chamber walls. Several other delegates joined him. Velox's stone face cracked with the smallest smile. Granted, the Grand Speaker said, waving his hand as if shooing away an insect. The session ended. The delegations filed out. The broadcast feeds cut to analysts on 100 different worlds, all saying the same thing. Earth was finished. The vote tomorrow would be unanimous. Humanity had nothing. In the corridor outside the chamber, Sujin caught up to Hyun. She was 28 years old and had trained for this position her entire life. She had never felt so helpless. Sir, she said, why did you not say anything? They are lying about the fleet numbers. That data is fabricated. We could have shown them that much at least. Hyun kept walking. His footsteps were the only sound in the hallway. Because defense is what the weak do, he said quietly. We are not going to defend ourselves. Then what are we going to do? He stopped and looked at her. His eyes were calm, but there was something behind them that she had not seen before. Something old and patient and very, very awake. We are going to educate them. He left her standing in the corridor and returned to his quarters. He sat at his desk, opened a secure channel to Earth and typed a single coded message, initiate. Then he turned off the screen, folded his hands and waited for dawn. 12,000 light years away, in a building that looked like nothing special on a quiet street in Seoul, President Bae Jae-suk sat at the head of a long table and read the coded message on his screen. He read it once. Then he closed his eyes and let out a breath that he felt he had been holding for 43 years. Bring them in, he said. Fleet Admiral Kwon Tae-sun entered. First, he was 61 years old, built like a man who had carried heavy things his entire life, and he walked with the slow confidence of someone who had made peace with whatever was coming next. Behind him came Shin Ha-young, head of the Weapons Research Division. She was small, quiet, and had not slept. In 3 days, she carried a black case under her arm. The ambassador has sent the signal, Jisuk said. Tell me where we stand. T-Sun pulled up a tactical display. The hologram filled the center of the table with stars, borders, and the slow-moving shapes of fleets. The Ikthari have moved 64 warships to the edge of our colonial space, he said. They are positioned along the Mara corridor and the outer boundary of the Hainum colony. He traced the lines with his finger. This is not a defensive posture. This is a staging formation. They plan to invade our colonies the moment the assembly votes to strip our territory. Jisuk stared at the display. They were never going to wait for a verdict. No, sir, the trial is theater. Invasion was always the point. The room was quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. The galaxy's great democratic institution, the assembly that claimed to stand for peace and cooperation, was providing cover for a military conquest. And not a single member had warned Earth. Jisuk turned to Shin Hayoung. Hayoung opened the black case. Inside was a data tablet and a small silver device no bigger than a coin. She placed both on the table. 22 years ago, she said, when it became clear that the assembly would never treat us as equals, a decision was made to begin a parallel development program. Everything we built complied with every treaty we signed, every single one. She paused. But treaties have edges. They define what you cannot do. They do not define what you can do in the spaces between. She activated the tablet. Schematics appeared: ship designs, engine configuration, stealth field, generators, weapon systems that had no names in any galactic database because no one had ever imagined them. We built 600 ships, she said. They are faster than anything the Ikthari have. Their stealth systems are based on principles that the Assembly Science Council told us were theoretically impossible. We did not correct them. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. We also did not lie. They never asked. T-Sun spoke again. The ships are already in position. They have been moving for 2 weeks. Running dark. No emissions, no signals. As far as the galaxy knows, Earth has a small defensive fleet parked in our home system. He looked at the president. Sir, I need your authorization for full activation. Jisuk looked at the display for a long time, then he nodded. Do it. While Earth's military prepared in silence, Han Duyun sat in his quarters on the assembly station and did not sleep. He had work to do. I am Sujin arrived at his door at midnight. She found him surrounded by data screens, files open on every surface. His jacket hung on the back of his chair. He looked like a man building something. Sit down, he told her. I want to show you something. She sat. He turned a screen toward her. On it was a file marked with the Rithani government seal, very old. Do you know how the Rithani earned their seat on the inner circle? He asked. Sujin shook her head. 400 years ago they discovered pre-spaceflight species on a world called Vithari Prime, a civilization of roughly 2 billion people, artists, builders. They had just invented radio. Duyun scrolled through the file. The Rithani declared the world resource zone and removed the population, all of them. The official record calls it a relocation program. The classified record, which you are now looking at shows that 90% of the Vithari died during the removal process. Sujin stared at the screen. How did you get this? Yun Mire, Duyun said simply. He opened another file. The Icthari ran slave economies for 600 years. They called it contractual labor integration. They reformed eventually, but their current system of indentured service is the same thing under a new name. They just filed different paperwork. He opened file after file, species after species. Genocides classified as border disputes. Biological weapons testing on primitive worlds disguised as environmental studies. Forced sterilization programs described as population management assistance. 11 of the 14 inner circle species committed acts that make anything in human history look small, Dajin said. All of it is buried, reclassified, forgotten. He looked at Sujin. They are not afraid of what we have done. They are afraid of what we can do, because we are the only species that grew strong without anyone helping us. And that terrifies them. Sujin sat with this for a while. The station hummed around them. Through the window, distant stars burned in the dark. Will this be enough? She asked. Before Dajin could answer, his secure channel activated. Yun Miri's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. I have the final package, she said. Financial records, communications, intercepts, military deployment orders. The Icthari have been secretly arming 3 border species to attack our colonies. The orders were signed before the trial began, before the charges were even filed. She paused. There is one more thing. A recording. She played it. Grand Speaker Velo's voice filled the room, speaking casually to an Icthari official at what sounded like a private dinner. The humans are useful animals, Velos said, laughing softly. They fight our wars, they die in our conflicts, and they thank us for the opportunity. When this is over, we will put them back where they belong. The recording ended. The room was silent. Dohan reached out and downloaded everything onto a crystal data chip. He held it between his fingers, turning it slowly in the light. Such a small thing. Such a small, heavy thing. It will be enough, he said. Sujin left him alone after that. She walked back to her quarters through empty corridors, past alien delegates who were sleeping peacefully, certain that tomorrow would go exactly as planned. She thought about the look in Do-Yun's eyes, the patience in it, the weight. And she realized that he had been carrying this for years. Waiting, not because he was weak, but because he needed the galaxy to show its hand first. In the dark spaces between stars, 600 ships drifted without sound or light. Admiral Quan Tisun sat on the bridge of the flagship and gave his final order. Before dawn, all fleets go dark, move to position. Sunrise. No emissions, no signals. He paused and looked at the tactical display where the Icthari fleet sat like an iron wall around human space. We become ghosts and we stay ghosts until the ambassador gives the word. The ships moved, the galaxy did not. Notice dawn was coming. The grand chamber was full in a way it had never been full before. Every seat in every tier was occupied. Delegations that normally sent 2 or 3 representatives had sent 10. Species that had not attended an assembly session in years had traveled across the galaxy to be here. The observation galleries, normally empty, were packed with reporters, historians, and diplomats from worlds so distant that their names were barely known. Everyone had come to watch humanity fall. The broadcast numbers were extraordinary. 400 billion viewers across the galaxy. Every news network, every public screen, every personal device. The shaming of Earth had become the most watched event in recorded galactic history, and the second session had not even begun. I Am Sujin stood behind Du Hyan's chair and tried to keep her hands from shaking. She had seen the morning feeds. Every galactic commentator said the same thing. Earth would be expelled from the assembly, its colonies would be seized, its fleet would be reduced to a handful of patrol ships. Some commentators were already debating which species should be given control of Earth's colony worlds. They spoke about it casually, the way someone might discuss dividing up furniture after a death in the family. Du Hyan sat in his chair and drank water from a glass. He seemed perfectly relaxed. The crystal data chip was in his jacket pocket. Grand Speaker Veloth opened the session with a speech about justice and the sacred duty of the Assembly to protect the galaxy from threats. His voice was rich and warm and deeply sincere. Sujin felt sick listening to it. Then Delegate Asar stood and walked to the center of the chamber. He was glowing with confidence. His forearms were spread wide. Honored Assembly, he said. Yesterday we presented the truth about humanity. Today we must act on that truth. I move that Earth be stripped not only of its colonial territories but of its membership in this assembly entirely. Humanity has proven itself unfit to stand among civilized species. The motion needed a second. It got 14. 14 species, one after another, stood and added their voices to the motion. Each one delivered a short speech about the danger of human nature, the responsibility of the assembly, the need to protect the peace. It took nearly an hour. When it was done, Veloth looked down from his platform. Earth may now deliver its formal response before the vote. Doyon stood. He buttoned his jacket. He stepped out from behind his desk and walked forward, past the boundary of Earth's designated section, past the floor markers that separated the lower tiers from the center of the chamber. He walked all the way to the speaker's circle, the raised platform in the exact center of the room, where only the Grand Speaker and inner circle members were permitted to stand. He stepped onto it. The chamber went quiet. Veloth leaned forward. Ambassador Han, he said coldly, you are not authorized to stand in the speaker's circle. Return to your tier. Doyon looked up at him. No, he said. The word was simple and quiet, and it landed like a stone in still water. Veloth blinked. No one had ever refused an instruction from the Grand Speaker in open council. There was no protocol for it because it had never happened. Doyon did not wait for permission. He began to speak. Yesterday, he said, Delegate Asar showed this assembly the worst moments of human history, our wars, our bombs, our cruelty to each other. Every image was real. Every fact was true. Humanity has blood on its hands. I will not deny this. The chamber was absolutely silent. But today, I would like to return the favor. He took the crystal data chip from his pocket and placed it into the broadcast console built into the speaker's circle platform. the massive display behind him. Activated. Let me show you the history that this assembly forgot. The first file appeared. The Rithani relocation of Vitari Prime. 2 billion people removed from there. World 90% dead. The documents were stamped with Rithani. Government seals, they were not. Accusations, they were the Rithani's own. Records. The chamber erupted, delegates shouted. The Rithani delegation rose to their feet. Veloth slammed his hand on his console and ordered the broadcast cut. Nothing happened. Doyun continued calmly. 8 hours ago, Earth's Communications Division established a direct link to the Galactic Relay Network. This broadcast is no longer running through assembly systems. It is running through ours. Every inhabited world in this galaxy is watching right now, unfiltered, unedited, and there is nothing anyone in this room can do to stop it. The room went cold. 400 billion viewers watching live, and now they were about to see everything. The files played one after another. Ekthari slave economies, the forced sterilization programs run by the Nelori Federation, the biological weapons tests conducted by the Hashin Collective on 3 primitive worlds. Genocide after genocide, buried under bureaucratic language and classified seals exposed now under the lights of the chamber for the entire galaxy to see. Asar was on his feet shouting. Other delegates were shouting. Veloth was giving orders that no one was following. The noise was enormous. Dohan raised his voice just enough to cut through it. You called us predators, you are right. He let the words settle. Humans are predators, we evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day. And we survived because we are stubborn and violent and refuse to die quietly. He turned slowly, looking at every tear, every face. But we are something else that none of you are. We are the only species in this galaxy that remembers its crimes. We build monuments to the people we killed. We teach our children what we did wrong. We put our worst moments in museums and make our young ones walk through them. Not because we are proud of what we did, but because we swore we would never forget it. His voice dropped. Can any of you say the same? Silence, complete and total silence. Now Doyan said, let me show you one more thing. The display changed. Military communications, deployment orders, star charts with fleet positions marked in red. Every document carried the personal seal of Delegate Asor. The Zalari moved 64 warships to the borders of human colonial space 3 weeks before this trial began. They have been arming 3 border species to assist in an invasion of our colonies. The orders were signed before the charges against Earth were even filed. He looked directly at Asar. This trial was never about justice. It was about taking what is ours while the galaxy watched and applauded. Then he played the recording. Veloth's voice, warm and laughing, filled the chamber. The humans are useful animals. They fight our wars, they die in our conflicts, and they thank us for the opportunity. The recording ended. Veloth sat frozen on his platform. His stone face had cracked, not with anger, with fear. Doyan stood alone in the speaker circle and looked at the galaxy. You have until dawn, he said. Withdraw your ships from our borders. Rescind every charge and issue a formal apology to every human soldier who bled in your peacekeeping wars while you called them animals behind closed doors. Asar's voice came from across the chamber, shaking with rage. And if we refuse, what will you do? Human, you have no fleet that can match the Dominion. Doyan looked at him, and for the first time in the entire proceeding, he smiled. Are you certain? Across human colonial space, in the dark, between stars, 600 ships dropped their stealth fields at the same moment. They appeared on every sensor, every display, every tactical screen in the galaxy, like stars being born. They were not in front of the Icthari fleet, they were behind it, perfectly positioned, weapons armed, silent and waiting. The chamber saw it on the tactical feed. Every delegation saw it. 400 billion viewers across the galaxy saw it. Doyan stood in the center of the silence and waited for dawn. The first thing that broke the silence was not a voice. It was a sound, a low, rolling vibration that traveled through the chamber's structure as hundreds of delegates shifted in their seats at the same time. It was the sound of 312 species, realizing all at once that they had made a terrible mistake. The tactical display still glowed in the center of the chamber. 600 human warships arranged in a formation so precise it looked like mathematics made solid, sitting directly behind the Ictharian invasion fleet. The Icthari had 64 ships, Earth had nearly 10 times that number, and every single one had appeared from nowhere, as if the dark itself had opened its eyes. On the bridge of the flagship Tabak, Admiral Quan T soon watched. His communications officer confirmed that the stealth drop had been received by every sensor network in the galaxy. He nodded once, then opened a broadband channel, not to the Icthari, to everyone. This is Fleet Admiral Quan T Soon of the United Earth Navy, he said. His voice was steady and unhurried. We have held our fire for 43 years. We are still holding it. The next move is not ours. He closed the channel and leaned back in his chair. His bridge crew was silent. They had trained for this moment for years, but training and reality are different animals. Every officer on every ship knew that in the next few hours they would either witness peace or start war. There was nothing to do now but wait. In the Grand Chamber, the first person to speak after the reveal was not a politician or a diplomat. It was Observer Tanis of the Salian Order. The Salians were the Assembly's neutral arbiters. They had no military, no colonies, no territorial ambitions. Their only function was to observe, record, and judge. In 4 centuries, Tanis had spoken in open council exactly twice. Both times governments had fallen. She stood now tall and silver-skinned, her voice cutting through the chaos like a clean blade. I have reviewed the evidence presented by Earth's ambassador, she said. The documents regarding the Assembly members' historical actions are authentic. The military deployment orders signed by Delegate Asar are authentic. The recording of Grand Speaker Valoth is authentic. She paused. The Salian Order formally recognizes the validity of Earth's evidence and notes for the record that this assembly has significant questions to answer. She sat down. The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of people who had just watched the ground shift beneath their feet. Asar recovered first. He was a politician, and politicians survived by talking. This is exactly what I warned you about, he shouted, pointing at the tactical display, 600 warships hidden from us, built in secret. This is proof that humanity is the threat we said they were. They have been preparing for war while pretending to be peaceful. Every delegate in this chamber should be terrified. It was a good argument. It might have even worked if he had made it 6 hours earlier, before the galaxy had watched him get exposed as the architect of an illegal invasion. But the timing was wrong, the moment was wrong, and the faces looking down at him from the upper tiers told him so. 3 delegations stood and formally withdrew their support for the censure motion. Then 4 more. Then 6. The withdrawals came like stones rolling downhill, slow at first and then impossible to stop. Species that had eagerly seconded Osar's motion now distanced themselves as fast as they could. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of history while 400 billion people were watching. The brand speaker sat on his platform like a man made of stone, but the wrong kind of stone now. Not strong, brittle. He said nothing. In deep space, the standoff continued. Commander No Unjai stood on the bridge of the stealth cruiser Beekdu and watched the Ikthari fleet through her tactical display. 64 ships spread across human colonial borders. Her ship alone had targeting locks on 11 of them. Across the formation, every human vessel had its weapons armed and its firing solutions calculated. If the order came, the engagement would last 4 minutes, maybe less. Her weapons officer, a young man named Go Junhyok, sat at his console with his hands perfectly still. He had not moved in 20 minutes. Junhyok, Unjai said quietly. Breathe. He exhaled. Sorry, Commander. Do not be sorry, be ready. She looked at the display again. The Ikthari ships were doing something. Energy signatures fluctuating, weapons arrays cycling between standby and active modes. Charging, then stopping, charging again. They were nervous. Their commanders were arguing with each other, she guessed. Some wanted to fight, some wanted to run. None of them had expected this. Unjai thought about her grandfather. He had served in the Assembly's 3rd peacekeeping campaign, sent to fight in a border war between 2 species that most humans could not pronounce. He came home missing his left arm and carrying a medal from the Assembly that was made of a metal so cheap it turned green within a year. No one from the Assembly ever contacted him again. No alien delegate ever said thank you. He kept the medal on his desk until he died. Not because he was proud of it, but because he wanted to remember what it felt like to be used. We do not fire first, Unjai told her crew. That is not who we are. But if they charge a single weapon array to full power, we end this in 4 minutes. Understood. Understood, Commander. She sat down in her chair and watched the lights on her display flicker like candles in a wind that could not decide which way to blow. Back in the chamber, the hours passed. The dawn of the next cycle approached. Veloth, desperate to maintain some fragment of his authority, called for the censure vote. It was a gamble. He hoped that institutional momentum, the sheer weight of tradition and procedure, would carry the motion through despite everything. The vote began. Each delegation was called in alphabetical order by species name. One by one, they gave their answer. The Ikthari voted yes. Their 3 client species voted yes. 4 votes in favor of condemning Earth. Everyone else voted no or abstained. 308 delegations, one after another, refused to condemn humanity. Some spoke briefly before voting, expressing concern or calling for further investigation. Most simply said the word no and sat down. A few looked directly at the human delegation when they voted, and Sujin thought she saw something in their eyes. That might have been respect, or maybe it was just the recognition that comes when you realize someone you underestimated has been paying attention all along. The censure motion failed. It was not close, it was a destruction. Alsar stood at his desk with his forearms hanging at his sides. He looked like a man watching his house burn. Velok sat perfectly still, staring at nothing. Dohan had not moved from the speaker's circle through the entire vote. He had stood there for hours, his hands at his sides, his face calm. He had not spoken a word since his ultimatum. He had simply waited, the way his father had taught him to wait, the way his country had taught him to wait, the way his species had spent 43 years waiting. The vote was read into the record. The censure motion was dead. Dohan stepped forward. Now, he said, and his voice was quiet enough that the entire chamber had to lean in to hear him, about those treaties. He reached into his jacket and took out a second data chip. He placed it on the surface of the speaker's podium with a small, precise click. On this chip is every treaty that Earth has signed with this assembly over the past 43 years: trade agreements, territorial boundaries, fleet limitations, peacekeeping obligations. He looked up at Velox. All of them. He took a breath. They are void, every single one, effective immediately. The chamber did not erupt this time. It went cold, a deep, quiet cold that settled into the bones of every being in the room, because everyone understood what those words meant, and everyone understood that the man standing in the center of the chamber meant every single one of them. The chaos that followed was not loud. It was the quiet kind, the kind that happens when powerful beings realize the rules have changed and they do not yet know the new ones. Delegates whispered to each other. Advisors pulled up legal databases on their screens. Communications channels across the galaxy burned with messages, questions, demands for explanation. But in the grand chamber itself, the sound was like wind through dry grass. Restless, uncertain, afraid. Voiding all treaties meant that Earth was no longer bound by anything. No territorial limits, no trade restrictions, no fleet caps, no obligation to send soldiers to die in the Assembly's peacekeeping wars. 43 years of agreements, compromises, and carefully negotiated chains had just been dropped on the floor like a broken necklace, and the man who dropped them was still standing in the speaker's circle, calm as still water. Velox found his voice first. You cannot unilaterally void treaties that were ratified by this assembly. The process requires a formal petition, a review period, and a vote of the full council. Dajan looked up at him. Article 7 of the Founding Compact, he said, a treaty entered into in good faith by one party is rendered void if the other party is found to have acted in deliberate bad faith, including but not limited to conspiracy, military aggression, or the use of institutional mechanisms to facilitate harm against the treaty partner. He let the words hang in the air. "Those are not my words, Grand Speaker. They are yours. This assembly wrote that article. Earth is simply applying it." He paused. "Unless you would like to argue that the Ichthar invasion fleet, currently retreating from our borders, deployed before this trial even began, does not constitute bad faith, observer." Tanny stood again. The chamber fell silent immediately. When a salient stood, twice in one session, history was being written. "The ambassador's legal interpretation is correct," she said. "Article 7 of the Founding Compact permits unilateral withdrawal from all treaty obligations when systemic bad faith has been demonstrated. The evidence presented in this session meets that standard." She looked at Velox. "This is not a matter of debate, it is a matter of law." Velox said nothing. There was nothing to say. In deep space, the Ikthari fleet was making its decision. Warlord Dren stood on the command bridge of his flagship and stared at the tactical display. His 64 ships were surrounded. The human fleet had not moved, had not fired, had not even sent a threatening message. They simply sat there behind his lines, weapons armed, waiting. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen, not because of the guns, because of the patience. His communications officer spoke. "Delegate Assar is ordering us to hold position and await further instructions." Dren turned to him slowly. "Assar is a politician sitting in a chair 12,000 light years from here. I am a soldier, looking at 600 guns pointed at my fleet." He made his decision in the time it took to breathe. "Order all ships to withdraw. Full retreat back to Ikthari space, sir." "The delegate will not be pleased." "The delegate can fight them himself if he is displeased." "Signal the retreat." The Ikthari fleet began to move. Not aggressively, carefully, slowly, every ship turning away from human space and heading home with the deliberate caution of someone backing away from a sleeping predator, even though they now knew the predator was not sleeping at all. On the bridge of the Biktu, Commander No Unjai watched the withdrawal on her display. One by one, the red markers that represented Ikthari warships turned and began moving away. Her weapons officer, Go Junyok, let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside him for hours. "Stand down from battle stations," Unjai said. "Maintain position until the Admiral gives the all-clear." She allowed herself a small nod, just a small one. Then she opened a private channel to Admiral Tayson. "The Ikthari are withdrawing, Admiral. All 64 ships." Tayson's voice came back, steady as always. "Good, hold position, keep watching, and Commander, well done." The channel closed. Unjai sat back in her chair and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, her grandfather's cheap metal was sitting in a box in her mother's house. She thought maybe she would take it out when she got home, put it somewhere better, somewhere it could be seen. In the Grand Chamber, the political landscape was rearranging itself in real time, with the Ikthari retreating in. The treaties voided. Every calculation that every species had made about Earth was now wrong. The small, quiet, obedient humans who sat in the back row and did what they were told no longer existed. Something else had taken their place, and no one was quite sure what to do about it. Dim Sujin stood near the edge of the human delegation section when she noticed movement. 3 delegates from smaller species were approaching. They were from worlds that Sujin recognized as minor assembly members, species that had no power, no seats on the inner circle, and no voice in the decisions that shaped their lives. They had one thing in common with Earth. They knew what it felt like to sit in the back row. One of them, a delegate from a species called the Yanari, spoke quietly to Sujin. We would like to know if Earth is open to direct negotiations outside the assembly framework, new agreements, new partnerships. Sujin looked across the chamber at Dahyun. He was still standing in the speaker's circle, watching the room with those calm, patient eyes. She caught his gaze and saw the smallest nod. She turned back to the Yanari delegate. Earth remembers who was silent during this trial, she said. But we also remember who was kind, even if that kindness was only a look or a moment of hesitation before voting. She straightened. Yes, let us talk. Across the chamber, Veloth made one final attempt. He rose from his platform and proposed reconciliation talks, a new framework, a fresh start. His voice was warm and reasonable, the voice of a leader extending a hand. Dahyun looked up at him and shook his head. You may schedule reconciliation talks when you have replaced every member of the inner circle who conspired against us, he said. When you have opened your classified archives to independent review. When you have acknowledged publicly and without reservation what was done to the species that came before us, the ones who were not strong enough to stand where I am standing. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Until then, Earth will govern its own affairs. Veloth sat down. The session was over, not formally. No one closed it, but it was over. 12,000 light years away, President Bae Jae-seok stepped before the cameras. The broadcast from the assembly had been watched by billions of humans across Earth and its 5 colonies. People had watched in offices and homes, and schools and military bases. They had watched a man from their species stand alone in a room full of beings who wanted to erase them. And they had watched him refuse to break. Jae-seok's speech was short. He was not a man who believed in long speeches. We joined the galaxy hoping to be welcomed, he said. We were used. Instead, for 43 years we smiled. We cooperated. We sent our people to fight and die in wars that were not ours, for an assembly that laughed at us when the doors were closed. Today, our ambassador reminded the stars that we are not guests in this universe. We are residents, and we will not apologize for surviving. The broadcast ended. Across the colonies, across Earth, people sat with the weight of those words. Some cried, some cheered, most just sat quietly and felt something they had not felt in a very long time. They felt seen. Hours later, the grand chamber was empty. All lights had dimmed to their nighttime setting, casting long shadows. Across the tiers where hundreds of species had sat and judged and been judged in return. The speaker circle was dark. The displays were off. The broadcasts had ended. Han Du-hyeon sat in Earth's seat, the lowest tier, the position of least honored. He sat there alone with his hands folded on the desk, exactly as he had sat when this began. Sujin found him there. She stood at the end of the row and watched him for a moment before speaking. Sir, are you all right? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he might not answer. My father was one of the first human diplomats to the assembly, he said. He spent 30 years in this chamber, smiling, bowing, being polite when they insulted him, being grateful when they gave us nothing. He believed that if we were patient enough, good enough, humble enough, they would eventually see us as equals. He paused. He died still believing that, and I loved him for it. He was a better man than I am. He looked at the empty tiers above him, where the powerful species sat, where the inner circle had watched humanity beg for scraps for nearly half a century. But I could not be him. Sujin did not speak. There was nothing to add to that. Doyen sat for another moment. He straightened his jacket the same way he had straightened it before stepping onto the speaker's circle. The same small gesture of a man putting himself in order before doing what needed to be done. He walked toward the exit. As he passed Sujin, he said over his shoulder, "Come on, we have new treaties to write. Ones that are worth the paper." She followed him out of the chamber, out of the lowest tier, out of the back row, where humanity had sat for 43 years. They did not look back.